Supermen.
I am in the English Channel. It is cold, exceedingly wet. I am the voice of Britain before the Daily Express. My name is Britannia. This is my song. It's called Dancing with the Moonlit Knight.
All right, Jake, it's 1973. We have cracked our way into a new album. We are selling England by the pound. How are you tonight? As you sip your bourbon.
Doing great, Jarrett. Yeah. I'm hoping we get pretty good prices at the pound level.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, this is a great album. I know you and I had talked a little about our Spotify end of year wrap. I'm actually shocked that this particular song didn't make my wrap. It may be on my other account, but this is probably the one song that I've listened to the most this past year. One, because it kicks off my favorite album, one of my favorite albums of this era. But it's just a killer song. There's so many little earworms and goofy little things in it. Of course, we are talking about
Dancing with the Moonlit Knight from 1973, Selling England by the Pound, where we start to get into a phase of Genesis where you wonder almost, are these songs written for the record or are they written for the performance? Genesis had by this point become very well known for the stage act, the costumes, the Peter Gabriel eccentricism, and you just see another example here of just absolute domination when it comes to storytelling, stage presence. What you heard from at the very beginning of the podcast tonight is the introduction that they would do when they played this song live, where Gabriel just really encompasses a whole character. And one of the things that I think is really important for us to talk about is this is Genesis dipping their toe into politics. And you and I have never been shy about political elements in music. You know, the two of us happen to be very, very big Jackson Browne fans. We both listen to a heck of a lot of hip hop. Dare I say, Rage Against the Machine has a lot of influence in there. You might be able to name a few others, but the fact,
I'm a huge punk rock fan, right? So
right,
we get into there's a lot of kind of discourse in the music that we listen to, and it's intelligent music. That's part of what music is supposed to do for us, right? It's supposed to raise questions and make you feel things. So it's kind of important. For me, though, I don't feel that this is necessarily a straying or dipping for Genesis. I feel like Peter Gabriel has kind of always had pseudo-political commentary in the music of the previous few albums. In particular,
I agree.
Get Them Out by Friday, right?
I agree.
But I feel like this is an album that's really responding to some critical feedback that Genesis is getting at this time. And, it really has a lot to do with kind of being victims of their own success. Or maybe in other words, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? What's happening with Genesis right now, 1973, of course, they've been touring heavily. I mean, they released 2 major albums the previous year. And I think we talked about how they had been on tour just prior to both of those albums, and were just coming off of a major U.S. tour for Foxtrot, right, when this album was produced. And in classic Genesis format, right, this is all material that was written literally right before they went into the studio. So it is a really nice kind of snapshot of a place and time for the band and for England and for the world, right? But the criticism that Genesis is getting is that they have lost touch with their English base, right? That they are spending more time in the United States and overseas, trying to promote the band, and that they're just they've gone the way of the commercial bird, right? And I think there's probably a ton of precedent for this, particularly if you were a Beatles fan or anything like that, right? I mean, the Beatles, when they invaded America, they kind of didn't come back to England, right? They stayed in America. So there's got to be a lot of concern for genuine fans of this band that live in England that, like, they're gonna go away. They're gonna be gone for good. And I think that really rubbed Peter Gabriel in particular the wrong way, right? So I feel like he set out and really drew support from the band to do this, a quintessentially English progressive rock album of the early 70s. And I believe that's exactly what we get here. And that's why I thought it was so, kind of prolific to or maybe prophetic is the word I'm looking for, but to use that little live clip as the introduction, because it is so British, right? He even declares himself Britannia.
Right.
So, just coming out swinging. So here's a very English album. And we see that with the lyricism. There's references to all kinds of English stuff in here, including one, I just noticed it, but when he says I think in the last verse, he says, we'll tease the bull, right? That's a reference to bull baiting, of all things, which was kind of a very English blood sport, where the Old English bulldog was bred.
Interesting.
So there's some deep English references here.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that take on it. I wrestle with the fact that you think that Genesis is really above all things when it comes to criticism, right? But when you actually boil down who these guys were, the Tony Banks, the Peter Gabriels, the Mike Rutherfords, they were listening. They were listening to what the critics were saying. And like the fact that like anybody was whispering like, oh, these guys are selling out to the US, and then for them to respond artistically in such a way, I think is really powerful, especially at this point in their career, especially knowing, having the benefit of knowing what's to come in the 80s and even into the 90s with Genesis. But the fact that was weighing heavily on them, I think, is so important. And interestingly enough, and I'm really curious to get your take on this as a musician, but there's another kind of fun fact element here where this song was going to be bridged together with the cinema show, and it was going to be one track. And they decided not to do it out of fear of comparison to Supper's Ready. It would have been about the exact same length of Supper's Ready, and they chose not to do it out of that kind of fear of criticism. So are they writing music from a place of fear, or are they, is this more of kind of the early onus of punk rock kind of thumbing your nose at your critics?
That's a great question. And I think that there's actually a number of different things going on here. One was kind of this race from the late 60s into the early 70s to become commercially successful, right? You don't have a lot of bands like the Grateful Dead that can not sell albums but continue to tour successfully for 30 years. Genesis is not interested in that, right? They don't want this kind of fiercely loyal fan base that'll come and see them play. They want to sell the albums, and most of that is because their record labels want them to sell the albums, right? So they've got a huge amount of pressure on them, and all of that kind of culminated in the production of the Foxtrot album. And Supper's Ready being one of the massive tracks off of that. You know, you would naturally be tempted, I think, to try and recreate that success. But I think wisely, you know, there's a number of reasons I could potentially point to as to why that didn't happen to start off this album. One, I don't think it would have worked. I think musically they probably vetoed it. You know, you hear the comments from Mike Rutherford about how dense this song kind of came out. It's very busy. It becomes very busy. I think it's got a lot of really excellent thematic material. It was definitely stitched together, right, from a number of different ideas that I believe Peter Gabriel had.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's a little more disjointed thematically. But kind of beyond that, to close one album that way and open another album the exact same way is to in effect declare or throw down a gauntlet, like this is the new normal for us, right? And I'm certain that they weren't willing to commit to that. You know, not all songs can be 20 minutes from here on, and that wasn't really what they were interested in doing. My guess, Jarrett, would have to be that that in this case they're really writing music for Genesis, right? They're writing music for what they've become. And the best way I can kind of put this is it's, you know, it's, I don't know, Harry Potter. We'll make an English reference here, right? It's Harry Potter after he's figured out the whole Elder Wand thing, right? This is kind of the first spell that they've cast with this vast new power that they've acquired in the wake of Foxtrot. It's the confidence, right? This is a confidence album. And I feel like what they're basically saying is, we can write a successful Genesis album about any subject, right? You give us a subject. And so the hottest subject here happened to be, well, you guys are selling out. And they're like, all right, you want to see how English we are?
Right.
Here it is.
Yeah. We will give you an economic crisis. We'll give you industrial unrest. We'll give you social division all in one, like one song.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you know, it works. It works really well. Musically, this song is certainly one of the most commercially viable. And what's funny is it's not even a single off this album, right? I think the only single that came off of this album was I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe.
Yeah, their first hit.
And, you know, I'd be surprised if this didn't compete for release as a single.
Well, this album got to number 3 in the UK. It got to like in the top 70, I think, in the US. But it got to number 3 in the UK as an album, which for these guys was a monumental breakthrough. And to your point, I just want to kind of drill into this a little bit. This was a piano riff created by and written by Peter Gabriel. And then it was the combination of that riff with the guitar riff from Steve Hackett, which is a unique kind of writing combination that we don't see that often in the early Genesis days, where Gabriel and Hackett have kind of the main credits on the music writing, but creates kind of this very interesting element to the song. Live performances of the song were very relevant through 73 and 74, but really died off as soon as you got into Lamb, and then had very few appearances after that without Peter there. But we'll talk about a few of the others where Peter kind of pulled this song out in some of his solo acts. But let's just talk for a second before we play the song about like what was going on in 1973 in England. I just kind of rattled off like an economic crisis, right? Like the UK experienced, they were going through stagflation at the time. There was energy rationing. Like there was like basically a 3-day work week to make sure that people weren't on the roads too often. There was industrial unrest with trade unions kind of wielding this significant power. There was the winter of discontent. There was the economic struggles kind of intertwined with some racial tensions were going on, where the far-right National Front Party blamed immigrants for all of the issues in England. I mean, it was just a hotbed of nastiness. And from that emerged, I think, some of the best musical art that has ever bestowed us. You know, you had kind of the glam rock and escapism. You had punk rock kind of coming out of this. You had Northern Soul and just a number of unique individual little ditties like this one that we're getting ready to listen to, all influenced by this piece. So I'm certain that you have something to add to all of that, and I just wanted to kind of lay it out and see what you have to say.
Yeah, you know, I got to be frank for a second here. And you and I were both born in the 70s and the late 70s, and I often declare that 1977 was the greatest year ever, mostly because Star Wars came out and punk rock was born, right? So those are two pretty awesome things. And, of course, Two Tickets to Paradise came out in 1978, so you got that one, bud. But in the long run, the 70s sucked. It was an awful decade. It was, you know, you had global terrorism, you had these oil crises, you had, it was a time before good movies. It was a time before, well, between good movies. All the good movies had come out already up until the 80s, right? So the 70s, you had nothing good. So all you had really was music. There was no good video games. Right?
No,
so
this is what makes decade. Good art, right? Is this just this era of
it's misery.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, that's exactly where a lot of these things were born from. And you know what really stands out to me in this song in particular, but I think there's a lot of elements of it on this album, is just how much this crosses over into metal, right? And I mean, there's a great metal riff in this song, you know.
A few of them, a little bit.
But,
I think a few of them,
absolutely. But you know, I think in my head that just generally equates with anger or angst and anxiety, and you know, those sorts of things that make one aggressive. You know, aggressive music tends to model that. Just, you know, when I think about the 70s, is kind of what I think about. Just like, what a crap decade. But, you know, thank God we lived through it. Because it gave us so much.
Now we're on the 11th episode of our podcast here, so I have some statistics on who's actually listening to it. And there are probably going to be some listeners out there, because they're all about 10 to 20 years older than you and I. And so there are going to be some listeners out there that are like, bro, the 70s were the best. The 70s were, that was my time. That was my time.
That's right. And look, if you got laid for the first time in the 70s, I'm not taking that away from you. Right? All of the great things that you discover in life, if you found those things in the 70s and equate them to the 70s, you know, look, absolutely.
Yeah, but you also had to wait in line to get your tank filled with gas. So
right. I give you, in response, disco and bell bottoms.
Right.
And the Ford Pinto.
Yeah.
You know, all the crap that came in response to the gas crisis. That's, you know, that's a fun one. I actually learned this in a survey of music industry class I had in college, that disco was actually born from the gas crisis, in the sense that, and look, this by no means, I got this from a college professor, but by no means has it been researched. But the idea was that because records are pressed on vinyl, right, and vinyl is a petroleum product, that the petroleum crisis as a whole drove up the cost of vinyl, to the extent that record labels went big on investing in dance halls, right, and your Studio 54s and that sort of thing, so that they could make money until they could produce cheap vinyl again, or get their hands on cheap vinyl again. And so disco and dance, you know, was kind of a dance hall type music, brought to us by the record industry, for that purpose, right? To encourage more dance outings, so on and so forth. How true that is, I have no idea, but it's a fun little idea, right? That kind of some of that late 70s dance culture was born from the oil crisis, but who knows?
I'm going to go with that as a fun fact. I have a few fun facts about Dancing with the Moonlit Knight at the end of the song that we'll get into. Let's get into it. Let's hear it. And
well, one more point I want to make real quick before we get into it. One of the more clever references that gets made in this song is to the Knights of the Green Shield. He says, "Knights of the Green Shield, stamp and shout." The Green Shield stamp. Now, you may remember this. When we were little kids, we'd go grocery shopping with our mom, and she'd go to Safeway, the local Safeway, and would always try and make sure, whenever she had wrapped up her purchase, that the cashier gave her her stamps. Do you remember that? And she had these little green stamp books.
It's like ringing a bell, but I don't really remember precisely. I was so much younger than you.
Right. It took hearing this song and doing some research on it to kind of put this together. But really, Great Britain at this time had a kind of a marketing scheme, as it were. You'd go to a shop and you'd buy your groceries or whatever it was, and you would receive an equivalent to however much you spent at this place. These things called Green Shield stamps. It was a loyalty program, right? And you could trade your stamps in for merchandise that you'd order through a catalog. It was based on the green stamp scheme that was popular in America. And that's one of the hearty references here, right, to a British kind of process that's selling out to an American marketing scheme. The idea that we had green stamps over here and they had the Green Shield stamp over there. So the Knights of the Green Shield stamp and shout, right? The Green Shield stamp and shout. That's a clever little pun, I guess, or turn of phrase, calling out that kind of commercial loyalty program, which, I think amazing. If you were... just starting to see that sort of thing, it would certainly alarm you, right? Why do I have to be loyal to a shop now?
Right. Right. And now that's everywhere. That's amazing too, because it's so funny, because it's like we talk about this song being political, and political is so many different things. Like, it's not necessarily rebelling against your government. It's rebelling against industry and the things that businesses are forcing on you.
Right. And commercialism.
So, yeah, exactly. So let's listen to Dancing with the Moonlit Knight.
Can you tell me where my country lies? Set the uniform to his...
No, this is apparently a Scottish folk song reference.
Yeah, I've read about that as well, and am intrigued.
And I'll point out that this, we get to use a kind of a fun term here to talk about his a cappella intro. It's rubato. He uses rubato, which is kind of a free-form rhythmic approach. He's not really married to a particular meter, a particular tempo, I should say.
Selling England by the pound.
This is one of those you can listen to 15 times and hear it 15 different ways. There's new things to discover every time you hear it. And it's very dense in lyrics for the most part. There are a few really crushing instrumental interludes.
This little hook, I actually had to go in and do some research as to why it's never been sampled in hip hop. And it turns out...
Can you answer that for me? Because I feel like I've been listening back to all my Outkast records looking for this, because there's something in my mind that tells me
close.
that it's been sampled, and I've heard it. And I heard it before I knew who Genesis. Like I heard that hook before. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've been obsessed with where have I heard that hook before.
You've heard it before, and it's Outkast. It's the bass hook from Spotty Oddie Dopalicious, 1998.
Okay. Dude, I listened to every song that I could by Outkast, because I was like, you know what? If anyone's gonna sample that, it's Outkast.
Yeah, it's not an actual sample. They just borrow that lick and incorporate it into the bass line. Spotty Oddie Dopalicious is a dub track.
All right.
And then
right,
here we are, just off to the races, right? This track just takes off.
Yeah.
We got some tapping by Steve. I mean, breaking out all the tricks here.
Steve's all over this song. Like, he's all over this song. From writing credits to just the metal.
And this was a more challenging album for him writing-wise, because he's actually in the midst of a divorce, right? At this point.
Yeah. But that brings out some of the best art that there is.
It really does.
As we will discover with Phil Collins in a few years.
Yeah. So right there, though, I wanted to point out, Steve is using a volume pedal, very clearly using a volume pedal, and that's going to be relevant later in the song. So hold that thought. Just know he's got a volume pedal on his board. This right here is just so, like, it just reminds me of an 80s, movie, kind of a chase scene in an 80s movie.
Yeah, totally. And here comes a element that's, I think, so important to this song. It's almost like a choir in the background, but I don't think it's an actual choir.
No, you've been fooled again by the mighty Mellotron.
There we go.
That is the choir.
I was wondering. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, it's so badass.
But it's also so British. It's like it's got that Adam Hart mother from 1970s Pink Floyd like happening on it.
Yeah.
Here's where I think it gets so dense.
I could see that, but it's transitional to me. It just this victory march is such a kind of a triumphant statement, but it's also, bloody British. Here's your Knights of the Green Shield stamp and show.
Here comes Tony. And by the way, some absolute fantastic percussion work on this song.
Yeah, you could tell Phil's been just playing constantly.
He's having the time of his life.
Yeah, he's really just tightened up. He's playing a lot of jazz in this particular year. He's joined a pickup band, right, and is doing a lot of kind of freestyle jazz work.
With Brand X, or did that come later?
I think this is actually a very early version of Brand X. It may be Brand X, but I think that they went through a proto phase.
Yeah, he was one of the first of the five to kind of do his own thing. Which, if all five of them had just done their own thing and then come back together in the recording studio, Genesis would have always been the five of them, I think.
Yeah, and I think, the lead into that is the idea that they had, 3 months to write this album? And so it's that the industry of this era didn't allow for that sort of thing. I think Genesis, largely, like a lot of bands of the era, or even today, were torn apart by the factors of their management more than by anything else. You see it with the idea that Phil Collins is in this group, and that the rest of the band is terrified that he's going to leave. He's going to leave.
Yeah.
It's just because there's only room for one project. And I think it was just a mindset thing.
As you listen to this outro, you can kind of almost imagine what they were thinking when it came to bridging this together with the cinema show. Like this feels very Supper's Ready, like one of the bridges in that song. But it's really just the outro now of Dancing with the Moonlit Knight. And
this is really, kind of, I love what they've done here, because it's what I affectionately refer to as the Star Wars ending for a song, right? And if you think of the intro to Star Wars, sorry to make all these Star Wars references today, but I don't know what it is. But you have this big, powerful intro, and it's followed by that little pan down from the spaceship down to whatever planet it is, right? But it always goes, digu, 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 digu. It just has the little strings kind of falling off. And then it gives way to the film. I love the way this song ends, because it's the song itself is a gateway to the album, right? This is a British album by your favorite progressive rock band, and so here's our opening statement, and then it has that little trail off, kind of fluttery thing down to the planet, and then you get the album. So it really, the song serves as an intro to the whole album, as opposed to just maybe a second half of the song. And I love that idea. I think it's a much bigger, broader idea, broader concept, from a musical perspective, than just simply tagging on another 2 or 3 parts to the song and, calling it an epic. So that's kind of my final reason why I think they abandoned the idea, is that, you get so much more by saying, okay, now here's the album.
Yeah, I think they made the right call there. Because, to your point, I mean, this goes on to be one of the best albums from 1973. I was out on a bike ride today just listening to it from start to finish, and just, it's got everything you want in it. And I'm so excited to kind of dissect each and every song to the extent that we can from this album. But what a great start with Dancing with the Moonlit Knight. I guess the only fun fact that I have left, I had a few that I just revealed earlier on in the episode, but Paperlate, like the one lyric, Paperlate as the boy cries, in this song, went on to become a B-side on the Duke album, one of our favorite albums from 1980, and didn't quite make the full production of Duke as an album. I always think if they had put Paperlate in instead of, I might get some hate for this, but instead of Man of the Times, it would have been like the perfect album. But that said, Paperlate was a B-side, kind of earned its own little respect of its own right as a B-side. But the idea of Paperlate really started here in the studio with Dancing with the Moonlit Knight, which I just find to be super compelling and very fun. I love it when artists are very mindful about things that sort of work at one point, and then they decide to put it all back together in the future.
Yeah, I think, true artists kind of search their backlog and find things in there that continue that inspiration or continue to inspire them. And, Paperlate is just it's an interesting turn of phrase. It refers to the late edition of whatever the newspaper is, right? You had the early edition, the late edition. So this is the late paper of the day. So it's news of the day, as it were. And
is it like the British version of, like, we would always say, like, extra, read all about it? Is it kind of the British version of that?
Yeah, well, so it's your newsboys would say, the extra, read all about it, and then but they're either hawking the morning paper or the evening paper. And so the British newsboys would, if you're selling the paper at, say, 5:00, you're still selling off copies of the morning paper, right? And there may be people who want the morning paper. So, a newsboy who's specifically selling the evening edition is going to advertise it as the Paperlate or the late edition. But Paperlate is just a way of, it's a newsboy call in and around the big cities of England, referring to the late edition of the paper.
Nice.
And Genesis uses it typically just to mean kind of breaking news, right? Your late edition is where you'd find kind of breaking news of the day. If there was a big wreck in Cornwall or, something like that, it might show up in the London evening paper. It's been wired in.
All right. Anything else on this song? Anything else that you feel like we have left on the table that we got to cover?
You just made me think of one final point that I teased and never kind of followed up on. We were talking about something else, but towards the end of this song, you hear what sounds almost like a harp come in, and it's playing just a little descending harp line. That, in fact, is not a harp. That is Steve Hackett playing a 12-string guitar with a volume pedal. And what he's doing is he's plucking the note that he's playing, but at that point he's got the volume turned all the way down. He's rocked onto his heel, right? And what he does is he plucks the note, and then kind of as soon as he plucks it, he rocks the volume all the way up. So you just hear a wah, right? You don't hear the pluck of the string, and it takes the guitariness out of it and makes it sound like a harp. And so that's actually what's going on there, and that's one of the many little tricks that Steve employs with that volume pedal on this song. And that's a particularly neat one. I was not aware that you could achieve that effect until kind of digging into that. Of course, with the 12-string, that you can get a pretty reasonable harp sound. That's pretty neat.
I'm very intrigued by that because they get so many unique sounds on this album that I just think that there's going to be a lot to unpack as we go through. And next week we'll bring you their first hit. We'll get into the first song that kind of really broke through for Genesis. After all of this, after so many great tracks that we've talked about here, that they've put on to vinyl, we'll get into the first one that really broke through next week. I'm looking forward to doing that with you, Jake. Until then, we are Mild Mannered Supermen, and we appreciate you listening. Leave us some comments, leave us some feedback, let us know what we got right, what we got wrong, and we'll keep bringing this to you.
Talk to you soon, my brother.
Mild Mannered Supermen.